Lowen Ashleigh's story begins with a stranger dying in front of her on a Manhattan street. The accident is sudden, violent, and impossible to ignore. Lowen is splattered with blood, frozen in shock, and pulled out of the crowd by a man she has never met. His name is Jeremy Crawford. He helps her clean herself up in a nearby bathroom. And for a few minutes, two strangers talk as if the city around them has disappeared. Both are carrying grief. Lowen has recently lost her mother after a long illness. Jeremy has lost both of his twin daughters within months of each other. The scene establishes the emotional logic of the entire novel. Lowen and Jeremy meet inside trauma before they know anything else about one another. Their connection begins not with romance, but with vulnerability. And before Lowen ever enters the Crawford house, she has already learned something dangerous about Jeremy. When disaster happens, he knows exactly how to become the person someone wants beside them. Section 2. The Offer. Lowen arrives at a meeting with her literary agent, Corey, expecting a professional conversation. Instead, she discovers that Jeremy is there too. Jeremy is the husband of Verity Crawford, a hugely successful thriller writer whose best-selling series remains unfinished. Verity has survived a serious car accident, but has been left unable to write or communicate normally. The publisher needs someone to finish the remaining books. Jeremy wants Lowen. Lowen is not famous. She is financially desperate, facing the possibility of losing her apartment, and uncomfortable with public attention. But Jeremy argues that her writing style is compatible with Verity's, and that she can complete the work without becoming a celebrity. The offer is almost too convenient. Lowen needs money, Jeremy needs a writer, and neither of them yet understands how much the job will cost. Section 3. A house built around grief. To finish Verity's series, Lowen needs access to years of notes and outlines stored at the Crawford home in Vermont. She agrees to stay there temporarily. The house is beautiful, expensive, and deeply uncomfortable. It feels less like a home than a place where tragedy has stopped time. Jeremy lives there with Crew, his young surviving son. Verity is also in the house, physically present but apparently unable to speak, walk, or meaningfully respond after her injuries. Lowen immediately feels like an intruder. She has been hired to enter Verity's professional mind while living inside Verity's marriage. Sleeping under Verity's roof, spending time with Verity's husband, and slowly occupying spaces that once belonged to another woman. The arrangement is professional only on paper. Section 4. The Manuscript. Inside Verity's office, Lowen searches through boxes of notes, character profiles, outlines, and unfinished material. Then she discovers something that does not belong with the series' research. It is an unpublished autobiographical manuscript titled So Be It. The opening presents itself as brutally honest. Verity claims she intends to write without asking for sympathy and without protecting herself from judgment. Lowen begins reading because she believes understanding Verity may help her imitate Verity's fiction. But almost immediately, the manuscript becomes more compelling than the work she was hired to do. Lowen has entered the house to become Verity's literary replacement. Now she is reading what appears to be Verity's private confession. Section 5. The Verity inside the pages. The woman in the manuscript is nothing like the incapacitated woman upstairs. She is intense, obsessive, and consumed by Jeremy. Verity describes meeting him and quickly becoming convinced that he is the center of her emotional existence. Her desire for him is not simply love. It is possession disguised as devotion. The manuscript reframes the Crawford marriage. To the outside world, Verity and Jeremy were successful, beautiful, wealthy, and deeply connected. Inside the manuscript, Verity suggests something darker. She does not merely want Jeremy's love. She wants to be the most important thing in his life. That distinction becomes catastrophic when children enter the marriage. Section 6. The First Look. While Lowen works, she begins noticing small details that do not fit Verity's medical condition. A stare held too deliberately, a shift in expression. A moment when Verity seems to be watching rather than merely looking. The nurses treat Verity as severely disabled, and Jeremy appears convinced that his wife has little awareness of the world around her. Lowen begins doubting what she sees. This uncertainty is essential to the novel. Lowen is already reading a text that tells her Verity is manipulative and dangerous. Every ambiguous movement now enters a mind prepared to interpret it as evidence. The manuscript does not only tell Lowen a story, it changes the way she sees the woman who wrote it. Section 7. Motherhood is rivalry. The manuscript becomes increasingly disturbing when Verity describes becoming pregnant with twins. Jeremy is delighted, Verity is not. She experiences pregnancy as an invasion of the relationship she wanted to keep entirely for herself. The children are not described as additions to their love, but as competitors for Jeremy's attention. She writes about resenting the pregnancy and attempting to end it. After the twins, Harper and Chastin, are born, the manuscript claims that resentment continues. Verity performs motherhood for Jeremy while privately experiencing jealousy, anger, and emotional detachment. Lowen is horrified, but she keeps reading. Section 8. Lowen's own shadows. Lowen is not a neutral observer. She has her own history of trauma and fear. As a child, she experienced severe sleepwalking episodes that frightened her mother and contributed to emotional distance between them. Even as an adult, Lowen remains afraid of what she might do while unconscious. This matters because the Crawford house begins destabilizing her sense of certainty. She hears things at night. She wakes in places she does not remember entering. She starts wondering whether Verity is moving through the house, or whether Lowen herself is responsible for some of the strange events. The novel quietly removes the possibility of a completely reliable witness. Section 9. Crew knows something. Crew is young, grieving and living inside a house where adults are constantly hiding things from one another. Lowen begins noticing that his relationship with Verity may not be as one-sided as everyone assumes. At one point, Crew says something suggesting that Verity has spoken to him. The comment is small but terrifying. If Verity can communicate with Crew, then her condition may be partially performed. Lowen becomes increasingly convinced that Verity is aware of her presence, aware of the manuscript, and aware of Lowen's growing connection with Jeremy. The house begins to feel less like a workplace. It feels like a contest in which only one participant openly admits she is playing. Section 10. Harper and Chastin. Jeremy tells Lowen about his daughters. Chastin and Harper were twins, but their personalities were very different. Harper rarely smiled and had been diagnosed on the autism spectrum. Chastin was more openly expressive. Both are dead. Chastin died first from a severe allergic reaction while away from home. The manuscript does not claim Verity directly caused Chastin's death. Instead, it reveals something psychologically darker. Verity began convincing herself that Harper was somehow responsible. The idea allows Verity's resentment toward Harper to become moralized. If Harper is dangerous, then hating Harper can begin to feel like protection. This is one of the manuscript's most frightening patterns. It repeatedly turns desire into justification. Section 11. The attempt on Harper. Lowen reaches one of the manuscript's most disturbing revelations. Verity claims that when Harper was still a baby, she attempted to harm her. The scene transforms Lowen's suspicion into terror. If the manuscript is true, Verity was not merely an overwhelmed or emotionally detached mother. She was capable of deliberate violence against her own child. Jeremy, according to the manuscript, never understood the full meaning of what happened. Lowen now holds knowledge that could destroy him, yet she does not immediately show him the pages. Part of her tells herself she is protecting Jeremy from unbearable truth. Another part of her is already falling in love with him. Section 12. The space between Lowen and Jeremy. The emotional distance between Lowen and Jeremy begins collapsing. They cook together, they talk late at night. They share grief, fear, loneliness, and moments of ordinary domestic life. Lowen sees the husband from Verity's manuscript and the man standing in front of her as two versions of the same person. Her attraction becomes entangled with what she reads. The more monstrous manuscript Verity becomes, the easier it is for Lowen to imagine Jeremy as someone who deserves to be rescued from his own marriage. This is where the novel's moral trap becomes visible. Lowen is not simply discovering reasons to fear Verity. She is discovering reasons that make wanting Jeremy feel less wrong. Section 13. The woman at the stairs. One night, Lowen sees what appears to be Verity standing at the top of the stairs. The sight is impossible. Verity is supposed to be physically incapable of standing. Lowen panics and tells Jeremy, but when he checks, Verity is back in bed. The moment could prove that Verity is pretending. It could also prove that Lowen is exhausted, frightened, and psychologically unraveling. Jeremy tries to calm her. Lowen becomes more determined than ever to understand what is happening. From this point forward, she no longer sees Verity as a passive patient. She sees her as a potential predator. Section 14. The locked door. Lowen's sleepwalking makes her afraid of wandering through the house at night. Jeremy installs a lock so she can secure herself. But locks take on a different meaning in the Crawford house. Who is being protected from whom? Lowen increasingly feels watched even when Verity appears motionless. Later, Lowen and Jeremy discover themselves locked inside a bedroom from the outside. The event intensifies Lowen's certainty that Verity is far more capable than she pretends. Jeremy still struggles to accept the possibility. Lowen, however, is no longer merely suspicious. She is waiting for proof. Section 15. Chastin's death. Lowen continues reading the manuscript and reaches the period surrounding Chastin's death. Chastin dies from an allergic reaction. For Jeremy, the loss is devastating. For manuscript Verity, the tragedy changes the family's emotional structure in a different way. She becomes fixated on Harper. The manuscript suggests Verity convinces herself that Harper's emotional differences and behavior are signs of something darker, and she begins blaming the surviving twin for what happened. Grief becomes suspicion, suspicion becomes hatred, and hatred begins creating a narrative in which Verity can imagine herself justified. Section 16. The lake. The manuscript eventually reaches Harper's death. Jeremy believed the boating tragedy was an accident. The manuscript claims otherwise. Verity writes that she took Harper and crew onto the lake and deliberately created the conditions that led to Harper drowning. She then presents herself as unable or unwilling to save her daughter. For Lowen, this changes everything. If the manuscript is true, the Crawford family did not suffer two unrelated tragedies. One of them was murder, and the woman responsible is upstairs. Section 17. Verity moves. Lowen begins actively testing Verity. She watches her, challenges her, attempts to provoke reactions. The more she looks, the more certain she becomes that Verity is pretending to be less capable than she really is. Then she sees movement that can no longer be easily explained away. Verity's performance is cracking. The question changes from, can she move, to why has she been hiding it? Lowen assumes the answer must be sinister, but the final pages of the novel will eventually offer another possibility. Section 18. Jeremy and Lowen cross the line. The attraction between Jeremy and Lowen finally becomes physical. The moral complexity is obvious. Jeremy's wife is alive in the same house. Lowen knows intimate details about their marriage that Jeremy does not know she has read. Lowen also believes Verity may be dangerous. Each fact becomes a reason for the next boundary to disappear. Lowen's desire and her investigation become almost impossible to separate. She wants Jeremy, she fears Verity, and she increasingly benefits from believing the worst possible version of Verity is true. Section 19. Crew's injury. An accident involving crew briefly pulls Jeremy away from the house. Lowen is left alone with Verity by now. She has become determined to expose what she believes is happening. She sets up a monitor and watches. Verity finally appears to move with intention. Lowen confronts her. The conflict becomes chaotic when Jeremy returns and initially believes Lowen has crossed a line. Lowen realizes that suspicion is no longer enough if she wants Jeremy to understand. She must give him the manuscript. Section 20. Jeremy reads So Be It. Lowen hands Jeremy the pages. He reads the private document his wife never intended him to see. The manuscript destroys the version of his marriage he believed he understood. It describes resentment, manipulation, attempted violence against Harper, and Harper's death as deliberate. Jeremy confronts Verity. His grief becomes rage. The situation escalates until Jeremy kills her, with Lowen helping him make the death appear connected to Verity's medical condition. Lowen and Jeremy agree never to speak about what happened. At this moment, they believe they have acted against a monster. But belief is not proof. Section 21. A new family. Months pass. Lowen is pregnant with Jeremy's child, she, Jeremy, and crew are preparing to move forward together. The structure looks almost like the happy ending Lowen unconsciously moved toward from the beginning. Verity is gone. The manuscript has been believed. Jeremy has a new partner. Lowen has the family she once imagined while reading about someone else's marriage. But before they leave the Crawford house behind, Lowen discovers something hidden, a letter, and the entire story changes again. Section 22. Verity's letter. The letter is written by Verity to Jeremy. In it, she offers a completely different explanation for "so be it." The manuscript, she claims, was not an autobiography at all. It was an exercise in antagonistic journaling, a method of writing from the darkest possible perspective in order to understand villainous characters. According to the letter, the horrible admissions were fiction. Harper's death was an accident. Verity loved her children. The manuscript was never meant to be interpreted as confession. If the letter is true, Lowen has misunderstood almost everything. Section 23, Jeremy's secret. The letter contains an even more devastating revelation. Verity claims Jeremy had already discovered the manuscript after Harper's death. He believed it, and he tried to kill Verity. According to her version, the car accident that left her severely injured was not an accident at all. It was Jeremy's first attempt to punish her for what he thought she had done. Verity survived. She eventually recovered more awareness and movement than Jeremy realized. She began pretending to remain incapacitated because she was afraid of him. Her plan was not to attack Lowen. It was to escape with Crew. Section 24. Lowen burns the truth. Lowen now possesses the only document that could fundamentally change Jeremy's understanding of what happened. She could show him she does not. Lowen destroys the letter. Her justification is easy to understand. Jeremy has already suffered enough. Verity is dead. Lowen is pregnant. Crew needs stability. Revealing the letter could destroy everyone who remains. But there is another reason. Lowen has built a life that depends on the manuscript being true. If the letter is true, Jeremy killed an innocent woman. And Lowen helped him, so Lowen does what Verity may have done. What Jeremy may have done and what every unreliable storyteller in the novel does. She chooses the version of reality she can survive. Section 25. Which truth is the lie? Verity ends without giving readers a clean answer. Was the manuscript the confession? Or was the letter the truth? Both possibilities contain problems. If the manuscript is true, Verity was a deeply dangerous woman who eventually invented a desperate letter to protect herself. If the letter is true, the manuscript was fiction. Jeremy misread it as fact, attempted to kill Verity, and later succeeded, with Lowen helping him. The brilliance of the ending is that Lowen cannot solve the mystery objectively because she is emotionally invested in one answer. She loves Jeremy. She is carrying his child. She helped kill Verity. She needs the manuscript to be true. That makes her final decision more important than the answer itself. Verity is a novel about writing, but more specifically, it is about the terrifying power readers give to written words. A manuscript looks like evidence because it sounds intimate. A letter looks like evidence because it arrives later. But both are texts written by someone with a motive. The novel never lets us step outside those motives and observe pure truth. Lowen believes she has been reading Verity. In reality, she has been reading herself through Verity. Every page gives Lowen permission to move closer to Jeremy. Every revelation makes Verity easier to hate. Every suspicion makes Lowen feel more justified, and by the end, Lowen does not simply inherit Verity's writing career. She inherits Verity's position inside the Crawford family. That may be the darkest transformation in the entire book. At the beginning, Lowen is an outsider entering another woman's story. At the end, she has taken the woman's work, husband, home, child, and future. Then she destroys the one piece of evidence that might challenge the story that made all of it possible. The question is therefore larger than whether Verity lied. The question is why Lowen decides which lie deserves to survive, because in Verity, the most dangerous person may not be the one who writes the darkest story. It may be the person who chooses to believe it when believing it gives them exactly what they want.